USAID funds perversion and subversion, revolutions, coups, wars, and pandemics worldwide. Now, that's quite a mouthful. But the Reformation Society seeks to apply the Lordship of Christ to all areas of life, and particularly to smash cultural Marxism. And that's what we see in USAID, which we can expose. So USAID, notice I don't call it USAID because the correct name is US Agency for International Development. As Elon Musk said, there's no aid in USAID. It's a complete fraud. So it's a mind game. Agency for International Development, in abbreviation, is AID. But you might think it's an aid agency, but it's not. It's actually an agency for international development. And what are they developing? Perversion and subversion, mainly. USAID has been abused by the US government to undermine Christian churches and freedom worldwide. And the activities have actually increased persecution of the church worldwide. Just look at Iran, look at Zimbabwe, look at what's going on in the Middle East. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And that's exactly what they do. Now, Donald Trump, somewhere along the line, got the idea of a Department for Governmental Efficiency, and very wisely chose Elon Musk to be the man for it, because there's another fellow businessman, entrepreneur, who, running a company, you want to see what's unnecessary, what's a waste, what's being misallocated, what's being mismanaged, where can we cut costs, or as I say, cut the fats so that you can get down to what really matters, the bones and the marrow of the matter. And so DOGE, as it's called here, Department of Governmental Efficiency, start to dig into the USAID. And to quote Elon Musk, he said, it's not an apple with a worm in it. There's no apple, there's just worms. He said it's just one big ball of worms. He called USAID a criminal organization. And President Donald Trump called it run by a bunch of radical lunatics. I think that's very succinct and accurate. USAID is a ball of worms. There is no apple. It's just a ball of worms. It's nothing but corruption from one side to the other. In fact, as one researcher, Mike Benz, has put it, who's probably the best authority on AID worldwide, Mike Benz said that there's not one single legitimate, honest project in USAID on God's green earth, quote unquote. Not one. Every single project has an espionage or subversion goal. It's been described as a place of wasteful federal spending, and that's putting it nicely. Samantha Powers was the Obama National Security Association appointee. It's funny, USAID has been run almost exclusively by intelligence people, CIA people and all that. And she's been accused of wasteful spending, widespread mismanagement. Would you believe it? She resigned on the 20th of January. What happened on the 20th of January? Donald Trump became president. And I think she's trying to flee the inevitable that's coming. Well, this is now news headlines. Anyone who was a conspiracy theorist, been condemned of conspiracy theorist, has now been vindicated. USAID corruption evident for years. Yes, it was, but you would have been deplatformed for saying so just a short while ago. So Donald Trump's secretary, Caroline Leavitt, gave a few interesting examples, which are more on a trivial level, but just to give you the flavor. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces. $70,000 for production of a diversity, equity, and inclusion musical in Ireland. $47,000 for transgender opera in Colombia. I mean, you can't make this up. The Monty Python comedy wouldn't have thought of this sort of thing. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. What on earth are these? I'm sure we can all think of good projects for this amount of money, but it's not that USAID funded some bad things and some good things. No, they were consistently bad. I mean, how's this one? Providing irrigation for the Taliban growing heroin, opium in Afghanistan. Doesn't that sound like a good use of taxpayers' money? Providing irrigation systems for opium growing in Afghanistan. I mean, shame, it's a dry country. They need more irrigation. You've got to be sure your opium is well watered before you harvest it. USAID is busy in 100 countries of the world. And they say every single one of them are staffed by and run by intelligence assets. This is a CIA operation. The primary goal of USAID is to get access to countries to gather information. They have done vaccination drives where the whole goal was not to vaccinate the people, but to sterilize them. That was proven. In Kenya, there was a polio vaccination thing, whatever they were calling it, and at the end it was worked out. It didn't do anything to protect the people from disease. It just sterilized tens of thousands of Kenyan girls, young girls. And that was the whole goal, to sterilize people. In India, they've proven lots of these vaccination drives by Gavi, which is the Bill Gates vaccination bunch. They are heavily funded by USAID. And they've done all sorts of things, sterilizing people in India and what have you, in the guise of vaccination drives. Other vaccination drives have been done entirely to harvest people's biometric data for whatever reason. And there's experiments on people where they don't know they're actually being experimented on. USAID is involved in all kinds of sick activities from Kazakhstan through to Cape Town. Now, there's the bright side and there's the dark side to USAID. Some of it's done as a show, as an outward ostentatious look. We're doing some good things. We're trying to help poor people and so on. But there's a dark side where they're all involved in intelligence agency subversion or gathering of information. But mostly, USAID is a slush fund for political purposes. On the surface, USAID is supposed to be a mechanism of providing aid to foreign nations in need, so that the United States can further diplomatic ties with that country. That's what their website says. But it's sold as foreign aid for people who need help, with a bonus of keeping or improving the relationship of America with countries for future compliance with US foreign policy goals. So a little bit of handing out candy, a bit of bribery, get people feeling good about you, and then hopefully they'll go along with your trade and foreign policy and vote for you at the UN and so on. But USAID is essentially a slush fund for politicians, for the CIA and for the non-governmental organizations, both domestically in America and abroad. USAID is meant to be overseas only, but we find that they've been funding lawfare against Donald Trump, prosecutions, persecution, character assassination of press, buying journalists, hit pieces. 2 Peter 2:19, while they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. You can write 2 Peter 2:19 over a lot of government programs, but USAID is probably one of the worst of them all. They are funding abortions and advertising for abortions worldwide. They're funding LGBTQ. This seems to be their pet project, promoting lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and all that. They promote Happy Pride Month. Notice, USAID, Happy Pride Month. It seems that Uncle Sam is primarily the slush fund for perverts worldwide. Privileges for perverts. Take when Barack Hussein Obama made his Africa mission back in 2013. The first goal of Barack Obama was to get a photo op with Nelson Mandela, who was on his last legs, except nobody informed him Mandela actually died in June, but they had him on the machine, just keeping the heart going, because legally you can't do a whole lot of decisions about a person's will if he's dead. So they had to keep him artificially alive, and they weren't ready yet. In fact, there was a British magazine, I think The Guardian, that said Mandela died in June, and they never retracted. And they later got vindication from the South African courts that Mandela did die in June of 2013, but they kept him on the machine until December so that it would coincide with the release of the Mandela Long Walk to Freedom film. In fact, at the premiere being shown in Piccadilly Circus in England, where both the Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales were there, after the screening was complete, up traipsed the director, the producer, the stars and all of that, and solemnly announced while the film was screening, Madiba passed away. All rigged. They literally switched off the machine to coincide with that so that they could have this photo op, a promotional moment to promote the film. And so poor Barack Hussein Obama gets to South Africa and he can't get his photo op with Mandela. I mean, he's on a machine, effectively, technically dead in the hospital. But what was the second goal? Promote the gospel of gay marriage and all this. By the way, look at this, just to get the idea. See the cameraman crouched down? to give the impression of Barack Hussein Obama unconcernedly, bravely walking amongst the crowd, shaking people's hands. But notice, the crowd is only 3 people deep, and there's security all over the place behind them, and they're all wearing the same caps, they all got the same flags, alternatively American, Tanzanian. This is Dar es Salaam, and the cameraman's crouching down that he can give the impression of depth, like he's in the middle of a massive crowd. Meanwhile, these are a selected group of photo op people who've gone through security and metal detectors and all the rest of it. They've all been chosen. I mean, that just shows how the media gives you a false impression. But when Obama came in, instead of speaking out against the ongoing Islamic slave trade carrying on in Africa to this day, like in Mauritania, Mali, and Sudan, President Obama had the highest priority to promote this radical pro-abortion, pro-homosexual agenda. He talks about gay rights, but gays have always had the same rights as anyone. They've got the right to property, the right to vote, they've got the same standing in the courts of law. What he's advancing is privileges for perverts. You notice how Newspeak called him the first gay president, and there's a lot of evidence that Obama was gay, and even that Michelle Obama is really Michael. And there's, just type into Google and see, is Michelle Obama a man? And see some of the pictures come up and see what you think. But then again, the French president's got a tranny wife as well. So pro-family advocates complained of the arrogant, bullying manner and the insensitivity of the US State Department against pro-life, pro-family administrations throughout Africa. Marriage is one man and one woman for life. You can't redefine marriage. And when people speak about gay marriage, that's inverted commas. Marriage is defined by the Creator God. And there is no such thing as a gay marriage. You've got to put inverted commas and italics when you talk about it. Marriage can only be between a man and a woman. Well, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Deputy President William Ruto slammed Obama's remarks, declaring this nation, the nation of Kenya, is a God-fearing nation. And so homosexuality is illegal in Kenya. Animals don't even behave like this. And said, this is un-African, this is un-Christian, this is inhuman. We will not accept it, we will never comply. And an Anglican bishop in Kenya said, people who have ruined their own country should not presume to come here and lecture us on the way forward. Well said. In 2013, the US Agency for International Development, or USAID, embarked on one of the most shocking abuses of taxpayer dollars. The US government under Obama announced they would be spending $11 million to train homosexual activists in other countries. The Washington Blade, the main gay newspaper in DC, praised the Obama administration for creating an army of international lobbyists for same-sex marriages, for anti-discrimination laws, and for homosexual rights or privileges for perverts around the globe. And according to USAID, the first phase of this program was focused on developing countries that opposed homosexuality. Well, 54 of the 55 countries in Africa oppose homosexuality. South Africa is the only country in the continent of Africa to allow so-called same-sex or homosexual marriage. And why is that? It's because this government is a client state created by the globalists. It's an illegitimate government that was propped in, and our constitution was even just rigged. It was not written in South Africa, it was written in New York or Washington. And so this is what they want to push at us, and this was the verbiage of Obama on his so-called mission to Africa. And we wrote to counter this, the rise of the gay GB and the pink Inquisition. And the old KGB of the Soviets persecuted the church, and in the New World Order in the Western countries, they're using the gay GB, the gay movement, as a stick to beat over the heads of Christians. You know, if you don't approve of this, then you're a bigoted, narrow-minded, homophobic, and so on and so forth, and they keep swearing at you. One of the first official acts of President George W. Bush, when he was elected president, was to defund Planned Parenthood's abortion services overseas. So one of Barack Hussein Obama's first acts as president was to refund Planned Parenthood abortions in Africa. So how's that? Because of Barack Obama's pro-abortion policies, hundreds of thousands of black babies were killed in Africa through abortion with US taxpayers' money, mostly sent through USAID. Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord, and so bring wrath on yourself from the Lord? Now, they are involved all over the place, and as you can see, they are saturating Southern Africa and Central Africa with their programs. And they're not good programs. As far as Kazakhstan, they're busy, even Mongolia. That's why I put the KGB badge next to the USAID here. The USAID is doing now what the KGB used to do during the Cold War, subverting countries and preparing them for communism. So the KGB also had active measures department, where they specialized in disinformation subversion. Disinformation, planting stories, rumors, cyber and so on, targeting certain people, character assassination. Just think of the character assassination. Anyone who makes a stand against the COVID cult or against the New World Order, they suddenly get attacked with all sorts of things. When there was a pro-life justice about to be approved to the Supreme Court, suddenly they find people out of the woodwork. Oh, he groped me when I was in college so many years ago. I can't remember exactly when or where, but I know it was him. And later on, many of them have admitted they lied just to prevent this person from getting the nomination. And they have sexual scandals, all sorts of things. And all these people who loved Donald Trump when he was just a businessman, they suddenly hated him the moment he became a political candidate and a threat to him. And suddenly, people who hadn't said a word for 30, 40 years come up with, oh, Donald Trump groped me when I was a teenager or something like this. Or can you even believe these people? And they've been so traumatized about it, but they didn't say a word about it until he was running for president and so on. Well, that's what KGB used to do. Active measures is a Soviet term for the actions of political warfare conducted by the Soviet security services to influence the course of world events. And so you'll see the moment you get somebody in like Alternative for Deutschland or the Freedom Party in the Netherlands, suddenly they will work out some scandal, something to try and bring this person down. And they did the same with Donald Trump. Active measures. And there's a good quote from President George Washington. President George Washington said, government is not reason, government is force. And like a fire, it makes a dangerous servant and a fearful master. So think of a fire. Fires can warm and cook your food, fires can warm your home, fires can do good things, but fires are dangerous. You've got to keep the fire in the fireplace. If the fire reaches your curtains, the whole house is doomed because curtains are notoriously flammable. If the fire reaches your carpet or your upholstery, very flammable, the whole house can be lost. Government must be kept in its place, chained down by the restrictions of the Constitution, just like you would restrict a fire to a fireplace. And government is a dangerous servant, but a fearful master. So a book exposing the United Nations abuses in the Congo in the 1960s was called The Fearful Master, taking that quote from President George Washington. If you think your government's a fearful master, international government is even worse, because a UN troop cannot be prosecuted according to the laws of the country he comes from or the country in which he is serving. He's under the UN, and they're outside of the law, they're above the law. And so the worst government on earth is an international government. And so the fearful master, in this case, is the UN. But all governments are dangerous servants and fearful masters. USAID is involved in fraud all over the world. And scandals come out every now and then. USAID has been abused to undermine Christian churches worldwide, to undermine freedom worldwide. Just think of the people being murdered and massacred throughout the Middle East in countries that used to be free for Christians, like Syria and Egypt and Iran, but destabilized by US State Department and USAID, which is their partner in crime. We've seen increasing persecution of the church worldwide in places where AID has been busy. And USAID is seen as an arm of the military. They always have intelligence people running them. And many of the people on the ground are intelligence or military assets. They're the kind of people they can trust, because gathering intelligence and causing subversion is a key part of what they do. And so the USAID is actually a front for the CIA. It's run by the CIA effectively. It's always ex-chiefs of the CIA or ex-deputy director of the CIA, something like that. And that's why USAID's files and information is considered classified. And many of them are screaming blue murder right now because Donald Trump and Elon Musk are releasing facts that have been hidden from the people for so long. According to Mike Benz, there's no daylight between the CIA and USAID, meaning they're absolutely joined together. And they've got the flow diagram saying, okay, the administrators at top, Samantha Powers was the administrator until the 20th of June, and then something happened. And they've got bureaus for Africa, bureaus for Asia, bureaus for Europe and Eurasia, Middle East, Caribbean, and so on. Field offices overseas. Amongst the things that USAID funded, would you believe it is Antifa? Antifa, these anti-fascist thugs who are nothing but Marxist, what do we call them? Bullies, mobsters, gangsters. These people walk around wearing helmets and black masks and beating up people, spraying people in the face with gas, kicking people in the face, smashing windows, funded right down to our dear roads must fall, fees must fall, science must fall, type of thugs at University of Cape Town. These people are also getting money from USAID. The guys who are burning down campuses, funded, thank you, by the USAID. Burning jammy shuttle buses, thanks to USAID. Especially under Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, USAID went berserk because it was her vision to turn the Middle East upside down, the so-called Arab Spring. Notice nice new flags all available, all the different things, nice photo ops, drones available, cell phones. They guided the people how to use Facebook and WhatsApp to mobilize these so-called color revolutions. First in Tunisia and then in Egypt, and vast amounts of persecution followed. Of course, Iraq has suffered tremendously since America liberated them. They used to have 1.3 million Christians in Iraq. In fact, if you've seen the Passion of the Christ film, you've probably seen a whole lot of Iraqi Christians, because Mel Gibson found Assyrian church members in Iraq able to speak original Aramaic, and so bussed them in or flew them in that they could be part of the film. Today, there's not even 100,000 Christians left in Iraq. They've lost 1.2 million Christians since Americans liberated them from the benign dictator Saddam Hussein and hand them over to Muslim democracy where they persecute Christians and burn churches. So Barack Hussein, I'm sorry, I'm confusing the two names. Saddam Hussein only had Christians and his bodyguard, and he only had Christians in his kitchen being his cooks. You see, new Christians don't assassinate. And if you go to the downtown Baptist church in Baghdad, the organ was a gift from His Excellency, the President Saddam Hussein. And all of his bodyguards seem to come from that Baptist church too, by the way, interestingly, because the Christians would try and keep him alive, whereas the Muslims might stab him in the back, because he was effectively a secular Muslim trying to give the Christians more freedom than they got anywhere else in the Middle East. And since the Americans liberated it, the Christians have been annihilated. I mean, it's basically genocide. Going from 1.3 million Iraqi Christians to 100,000 is a catastrophe. But the worst of it was the falling of Egypt. Now, Egypt was once a superpower, and Egypt's still a super important country in Africa and in the Middle East. And very well coordinated under Barack Hussein Obama and his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. He was even whipping up the crowds in the squares with video projectors and satellites and what have you to be able to have him whipping up the crowds against his ally in Egypt. And this was a very well-funded, the Americans put billions of dollars through USAID to create these revolutions that toppled Tunisia's government and Egypt's government. Now, Mubarak, the president of Egypt, was a Muslim, but he is a secular Muslim, and he protected the Christians. He had military from the Egyptian army outside every church, monastery, Christian bookshop, protecting him every day of the year. And so every church was protected because he knew there's a lot of radical Muslims who'll burn a church down, you give them half a chance. Well, he had to go. He got toppled by Hillary Clinton's organized Arab Spring, and who came in? Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood who had assassinated President Sadat, because President Sadat made a peace treaty with the State of Israel, and next thing, Sadat got murdered by his own military, who were all Muslim Brotherhood people, at a very public event. maybe you've even seen a video, it's just quite shocking. He's in his presidential stand reviewing his military, and as they came opposite the presidential stand, they just machine gunned into the president's box, not only killing the president, but a lot of other people who just happened to be sitting near him. And now Hillary Clinton calls him and the Muslim Brotherhood a force for peace and moderation in the Middle East. The people who assassinated the previous president. And in the first weekend that he's in power, they destroyed 76 churches in one weekend. Burning, bombing, murdering. Christians murdered, our brothers and sisters, killed because of USAID policy and funding in the Middle East. And a pro-Christian government in the Middle East toppled, a force for peace and stabilization removed. Before that, people had said Egypt was the most important stabilizing influence in the Middle East. And they were destabilized by bringing the Muslim Brotherhood. The Coptic Christians suffered a lot. I had a church in America and California where I was speaking up about this, saying, well, who cares about the Copts? They're not real Christians. I said, excuse me, what have you suffered for Christ? These Copts are willing to suffer for Christ and die for Christ. I'll question your salvation before I question theirs. The arrogance of these people, saying, they're a different denomination, so I don't accept them. Well, the Copts have different style. I wouldn't go for these icons. That's not our style. But they love Christ. They're willing to die for Christ. That makes them a brother in Christ to me. Stop the bloodshed of Egyptian Christians. End Christian persecution in Egypt. Stop the Christian genocide in Egypt. We've lost millions of Christians out of Egypt since the Arab Spring. Before the Arab Spring, in 2010, there were 15 million Christians in the Middle East, according to Operation World. After the Arab Spring, we were down to 10 million. We've lost 5 million Christians out of the Middle East, either killed or fled, because of the Arab Spring organized by Hillary Clinton and Obama. Stop the killing of innocent Christians in Egypt now. Obama supports terrorism. Mr. Obama, thank you. Your allies are burning churches and killing Copts in Egypt. Stop your support of terrorism immediately. The people in Egypt knew exactly who to blame. This was not a spontaneous from the grassroots rising. This was as coordinated as a sniper shot. This was organized and coordinated by USAID, who funded the whole thing. There was nothing spontaneous about the Arab Spring. And just think of how the media just portrayed it. Well, those were media probably owned by USAID. And then after that, Syria became the target, although Syria stood firm for 9 years. Until this last year, sadly, the government that provided more religious freedom for Christians in the Middle East than any other country after Iraq had been toppled, Syria was targeted and for destabilization from Obama's years all the way through. And Biden, of course, continued it. So very sad that Syria has toppled as well. And the very terrorists, like Al-Qaeda terrorists and ISIS, which America funded and started. I can't blame USAID for that. That was done directly by the CIA and the State Department. But they funded these people and started ISIS. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That was admitted by the Chief of Staff of the US Army. Yes, we started ISIS, but it was to target Syria. Of course, ISIS ended up beheading Christians in Libya and Egypt and so on too, but that wasn't the plan originally, apparently. But CIA started Al-Qaeda, they started ISIS, and by the way, Mossad started Hamas, just to make it really confusing. Back some genius in the Israeli Defense Force back in the 70s decided, the Palestinian Liberation Organization is mostly supported by the Soviet Union. They're mostly secular. What if we funded and started a Quranic-based Islamic group? They will annihilate the PLO, which is true. So Hamas got started with impetus from Mossad and finances from the Israeli Defense Force. And Hamas did their job. They annihilated the Palestinian Liberation Organization. But Hamas has become worse than the PLO used to be. Did you notice the 2022 Brazilian presidential elections were rigged? And USAID takes the credit for having decided the very close elections in Brazil. So the socialists came to power and the populist was defeated. And then the socialists went after the president and all the leadership of the previous populist nationalist government. And this is following the doctrine of USAID. They actually have, you can Google transitional justice. It's one of their doctrines. Transitional justice, how when you get to power, you lock up all the previous administration so that they can't get back into power. You find how you can find some law that they've broken, because laws can be selectively applied, and then you can find something, but it's tax laws or whatever, some technical, maybe they haven't got all the right authorization for their home building or their church or something like that. But transitional justice is a USAID doctrine that they've even got. Well, you can't see it on the website anymore. The website's closed down, but it's probably in an archive somewhere. USAID coached the Brazilian government and others how to go after their political opponents, exactly what they tried to do with January 6th political prisoners, Donald Trump, lawfare, how to persecute your enemies using the law in your country, or even creating laws if necessary. Some frauds have been exposed, like what they did in Venezuela and Brazil, but the biggest USAID Exhibit A is Ukraine. They've put more money. By the way, notice this is not millions, that's billions. Billions with a B. $16 billion USAID spent into Ukraine, more than any other country. In fact, in 2023, it was $25 billion. Can you imagine? They also helped sponsor the civil war in South Sudan. They've been involved in toppling the government of Nigeria because the government of President Goodluck Jonathan was too, well, they were not just too Christian, they were too against homosexual marriage. And for opposing Obama's LGBTQ, the USAID was targeted to help the opposition win, which is an ex-Muslim dictator who had seized power through a military coup. He now came to power through an election which USAID helped him win and convinced the Christians to do a counterproductive move of boycotting the election, which guaranteed that the Muslim candidate would win. Because Nigeria refused Obama point blank, we're not interested in this gospel of gay marriage. And so at that time in 2013, Obama got so angry about them, he forbade an American general to aid the people in Nigeria. Nigeria had been racked with Boko Haram attacks, 1,000 attacks on churches in 5 years, between 2010 and 2015. 1,000 churches were attacked by Boko Haram terrorists, killing 17,000 Christians. And then they kidnapped a whole lot of Christian girls from a school, and the big horror in Nigeria is bring the girls home, and they were demanding of the President Goodluck Jonathan bring them home. Well, an American general testified to Congress. We had real-time intel, I presume by satellites. They knew exactly where the girls were. They knew exactly where all the leadership of Boko Haram was. And if they'd provided the information to the Nigerian government could have decapitated Boko Haram terrorist group and rescued those girls. And then Goodluck Jonathan would have definitely won the next elections. But because he was ordered from the highest authority at the White House, which could only mean Obama, he was ordered not to give any aid to the Nigerian government. It doomed Goodluck Jonathan in the next presidential elections. Most Christians boycott the election, and a Muslim who had previously been dictator of Nigeria through a coup came to power through a presidential election. Thank you, USAID. And in the Congo, well, they've caused all kinds of eruptions and chaos there too. And of course, you know, in Afghanistan, they're doing important things like helping to provide irrigation for heroin, opium growing. Ukraine, US State Department boasted that they put $5 billion into changing the government, into regime change in Ukraine, 2014. You see, in 2014, Ukraine had an elected government who were friends with Russia and who had laws against homosexual grooming, so-called gay rights. And so USAID funded new TV stations, new TV programs, political parties, and radio newspapers, $5 billion worth. I mean, that can buy a lot of influence. And they got this comedian, pervert comedian, this Zelensky, who, I hope you haven't seen it, but this Zelensky actually performed on a stage naked, using his private parts to play the piano. I mean, literally. I mean, this guy's a sicko pervert. And they get him, this comedian, and you can actually see a video of him and one of his plays where he there's a TV program where he walks into Parliament and he machine guns all the members of Parliament to death. This is a TV personality, and that's his main claim to fame, being a pervert comedian, dancer, and actor. And then he gets elected, and his promise in election is peace with Russia and making sure that we have good relations with Russia, no war. And the moment he gets to power, he causes a war with Russia. So Victoria Nuland of the State Department boasted, we organized the Mayan coup, the so-called color revolution that took over Ukraine. And so Ukraine is an American client state. They are effectively being treated like they're part of NATO. They're getting vast amounts of aid, billions upon billions. USAID stands with Ukraine. Well, of course they would. Ukraine government is a creation of USAID. They started this war. There wouldn't be a war if America hadn't done a regime change coup d'etat in Ukraine. Maybe you can remember, this is back when I was very small, but I know it from history, America got upset with Soviets playing in Cuba. Cuba is in America's backyard, in the Gulf of America. Yeah? It's been renamed. So Cuba used to be an American ally. Well, the Russians helped stage a revolution that took Cuba and made it Castro's little hellhole. And then they started to put Russian bases in Cuba, and then they brought Soviet missiles into Cuba. And this created the Cuban Missile Crisis that almost got the world into World War III. You may recall that big crisis. What's it called? 19 Days in October, something like that. There's a book on this. There's a film on it as well. And at any rate, the Americans recognized that Cuba was a surrogate for the Soviets during the Cold War. Well, in the same way as the Soviets picked a fight with America by putting a client state in their backyard, the Americans picked a fight with the Russians by putting a client state in Ukraine on the border of Russia. And by the way, Kiev is much closer to Moscow than Havana is to Washington, D.C. But anyway, Russia launched an attack on Ukraine in 2022, but you need to know the facts behind it. In January 2022, Putin asked guarantees that Ukraine will not join NATO or the EU. Turned down. February 2022, Putin requests an urgent meeting with Biden to avert the crisis in Ukraine. Biden turns him down. Then February 2022, at the end of February, Russia launches into Ukraine. So this is a totally preventable war. When Donald Trump says this wouldn't have happened if I was president, he's dead right. I think just about every advisor and observer thinks that. And he could have got it closed quickly. In the first week of the war, Putin offered a ceasefire and withdrawal on certain conditions, such as let the eastern Russian majority areas secession be recognized. Because in 2014, the eastern Donbass region, Donetsk, Luhansk, they pulled out because they objected to the new law that said Russian couldn't be used as a medium of education in schools. 14,000 Russians living in Ukraine were murdered by the Ukrainian government before the war started, before Russia came in. I have friends in Ukraine who were telling me, the Russians were being welcomed as saviors in eastern Ukraine. They were coming in, these people were starving. Their homes had been rocketed and bombed by the Ukrainian military for 14 years. And now they said, at last, someone's speaking up for us, someone's on our side. And Putin was seen as a hero in eastern Ukraine and a savior. And in the West, it was Russia's aggressor. And they kept saying unprovoked aggression. Well, you can call it aggression, but you can't call it unprovoked. The Americans provoked it. They put not just military bases in, they were putting in missiles, they put biological warfare laboratories all over Ukraine. So notice these newspapers, though, were also being funded by USAID. And there's a lot of evidence of this. The Politico magazine, which is one of the big newspapers in political force in America, it's turned out they got hordes of money from USAID. Now, how's this for subtle? This is when Hillary Clinton was running for president soon. This is less subtle. Well, here's the facts. On Tuesday, just this Tuesday, it emerged that the media outlet Politico had received over $8 million from the US government in recent years. The news organization received $24,000 from USAID and larger sums from other agencies. Department of Health and Human Services put $1.37 million into Politico, followed by another $1.35 million from the Department of the Interior. Just according to usspending.gov, subscriptions can cost between $12,000 and $15,000 for just 3 users. Now, I asked about this during the White House press briefing on Tuesday because suddenly Politico closed the offices. They couldn't pay their staff for January. Something's happened. USAID closes, next thing Politico's got to close. I asked about this during the White House press briefing. Caroline Levitt said more than $8 million taxpayer dollars have gone to essentially subsidizing subscriptions to Politico on the American taxpayer's dime, and that'll no longer be happening. So Politico, which is one of the most dominant magazines in America, suddenly is gone. But amongst the agencies who'd be impacted by the closure of USAID, AID, we learn from British newspaper, is BBC's international charity, BBC Media Action. They count USAID as its second largest donor. Did you know the BBC gets donations? I mean, why do they need donations? You know, in Britain, they have a TV license. Every poor soul in Britain's got to pay a TV license, whether they've got a TV or not, apparently. And because the BBC is the national broadcast. But they still need donors, I guess, because these guys can't live just on compulsory subscriptions and licenses for people to own a TV set. In 2023 to 2024, US taxpayer-funded agency USAID gave £2.6 million. That's more than $3 million to the organization, which trains journalists. And notice this, helps improve communications in some of the world's poorest countries. In other words, able to take journalists from Nigeria or Kenya and teach them to be LGBTQ, situation ethic, atheist, anti-Christian, evolutionary, pagans, perverts, and so on. Of course, USAID is a major sponsor of things like Black History Month. You can see there. And here, they again try to have race-based history, Department of State being promoted, and USAID and Department of State sponsoring events like that. Well, here's one post I noticed. In less than 2 weeks, Dodge, or Department of Governmental Efficiency, has already saved over $1 billion by cancelling over 100 DEI contracts. And USAID, very heavily involved with UK aid. One wonders what the story is with them and how much of UK aid is funded by USAID. But yes, they stand with Ukraine, of course. Ukraine says it uncovered mass fraud in weapons procurement, according to Reuters. And corruption plagues Ukrainian army. We just heard from Zelensky recently that they've lost $100 billion. Billion, not million. He said of the $160 billion given by the US, they can't account for $100 billion of it. It's just $100 billion. I mean, you know, you couldn't fit $100 billion in $100 notes in this hall or on this property. Just the sheer volume of it. And these guys have lost $100 billion. But that's okay, just send us another $100 billion. Do you know the United States has got biological warfare laboratories dotted all over Ukraine? This came out during the war. At one point, the Russians were advancing and there was panic. What if the Russians gained control of our biological warfare laboratories in Ukraine? And it was asked in Congress, do we have biological warfare laboratories in Ukraine? And the person responsible, I think it was Victoria Nuland of State Department, didn't answer straight yes or no, gave such a convoluted answer, I can't even remember. It was so unbelievably, you know, it's basically a yes or no answer. And she all over the way. But why does America have biolabs in Ukraine? And why is USAID funding them? It gets worse. US funding Ukraine bioweapons labs, question mark? Verify says no. By the way, USAID funds Verify. And they fund, what are these fact-checking groups called? Not Spotify, there's a group that's called, starts with an S. It's an untrained group, they fact-check. No, there's particularly people, Scopes or
Snopes.
Snopes is funded by USAID. And would you believe it? They found that all these conspiracy theories about the COVID cult were false and fake news and so on. Well, they're all funded by USAID. Well, the government of Ukraine is one of the most corrupt in the world, certainly the most corrupt in Europe. Do you know that this democracy has banned all political parties except the governing party? They used to have 12 political parties. They're all banned. Only the People's Party, the party of this pervert comedian Zelensky, is allowed. He banned all media, closed down every single media outlet except the government media. He even has closed down a whole denomination. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church, he just closed the entire denomination down, arrested the people, ministers and so on, locked them up. So it's a democracy without elections, without other political parties, without freedom of speech, and without religious freedom. And so no wonder some people are saying, stop funding the Ukraine war. But a lot of the funding for the Ukraine war is coming not just from the US Defense Department, but from USAID. Perhaps the most shocking of all is USAID has now been exposed to funded the COVID cult. Here's the People's Liberation Army of Red China's bacteriological warfare laboratory in Wuhan, China. Wuhan Institute of Virology, run by, and the man in charge is a general in the People's Liberation Army for Biological Warfare. He's the author of Unlimited Warfare, where he states, of course, all in Chinese, I haven't read it, I've got an English translation, that he said, we are at war with the United States and America. We can't beat them in conventional or nuclear warfare. We will have to use biological warfare and things like this. In his book, that's the man who's the director of this Wuhan Institute of Virology. A Chinese general says we're at war with the West and we've got to use irregular warfare. And do you remember all this? The masquerade madness? When they had to harvest brain cells going up your nose? There was no proven medical justification for locking down 3 billion people worldwide, committing what amounted to economic suicide. Although the term suicide suggests that it's a voluntary act, but economic murder would be more accurate. The jobs of tens of millions of people worldwide were undermined, in many cases destroyed. I'm sure many of us in this hall were affected. But you remember the insanity. Big tech, big pharma, and big government united to crush family businesses and small entrepreneurs. The COVID-19 lockdowns, I call them the lockdown lunacy, proved to be a cover for colossal corruption and for communist centralization and control. Do you remember? We've got 500 billion rands that's going to be made available for the COVID relief fund. Don't worry about locking down your businesses. We will compensate you. Remember all that? Do you know anybody who got anything? No. So the 500 billion got lost, stolen, obviously. The South African Cancer government chose to sideline Parliament and replaced it with a committee of 6. Like in the French Revolution, they had the Committee for Public Safety. But the Committee of 6 assured us they were consulting their ancestors. So that made us all feel so much better. They also told us to not touch our face, remember? Do you remember when you were being told by the president how to put on a mask? I mean, he basically showed it was better as a mask over your eyes than over your nose and mouth. But if you can't see the virus, you can't get it. So the playbook they were operating out of was the Southern Communist Party. Bear in mind, Cyril Ramaphosa is a member of the Politburo of the Southern Communist Party. Let's not forget the fact that he might be a businessman, but he's a communist. Yet the extraordinary COVID-19 state of emergency, state of disaster, lockdown, it violated essential freedoms of our Bill of Rights, which are never meant to be violated. Aside from the masquerade madness at the local hospital, I mean, do you remember being harassed every time you want to go to the hospital? Freedom of religion, freedom of belief, freedom of worship is in our Constitution as part of our Bill of Rights, and yet they could suddenly close down church services. Do you remember when you had to travel by plane, and I had this, keep your distancing, social distancing, 1 meter apart as they shuffle us in the aircraft. Once you get there, you get jammed into the seats, no spare seat there. And then after the flight, after you've been sitting in the same place, in this cramped area with the confined air and all this, for 2 hours, maintain social distancing and going out, maintain 1 meter between each other, and you've got to go through this charade of acting as you exit the plane. I mean, really. And our church services were empty, but a plane could be packed full. What about our freedom of opinion and freedom of conscience? These poor people locked in their place of dwelling, even in shanty towns where it's got to be miserable in a corrugated iron place in the middle of the day. Can you imagine? And no, you're not allowed out. And in the first week, the government in this country shot and killed 14 people for breaking curfew. Well, that's one way of ensuring they don't catch COVID. I mean, what more must the government do to show that they really care about your health? In Zimbabwe, the government came into churches, beat up the minister, dragged him down the aisle with blood trails behind, and kicked the people's head outside. What more must the government do to show they really care about your health and well-being? You weren't allowed freedom of thought. You couldn't have freedom of expression. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must first begin by subduing freedom of speech. If you accept restrictions on free speech for any reason, you didn't have an education, you had an indoctrination. And all over, you weren't allowed to express any opinion separate from whatever the government narrative was. Do you remember if you dared post something on Facebook, it was gone in seconds? Imagine if they scrubbed the child porn from the internet as fast as they scrubbed hydroxychloroquine video. I mean, they could remove, Facebook removed 8 million posts in 2020, and that's according to Mike Zuckerberg, 8 million posts. Now he says he was bullied by the FBI and CIA to do this, and he deplatformed hundreds of thousands of people. He employed tens of thousands of sensors and algorithms that could detect you've used a keyword next thing. I mean, I would post something and within seconds came up, fact check, false, and so on. They couldn't have even read the thing, let alone the fact check. And it was deleted as soon as it was posted. It was so fast. Just think, there's no way they fact checked anything. And I knew the facts were true anyway. But what happened to freedom of the press? Well, now we learn that USAID owns a lot of the press, owns a lot of the journalists, and even gives some an assignment to do a hit job and this person to do a hatchet job and that, to spread this lie, to give this slander, this gossip, and so on and so forth. So the freedom of the press is totally undermined. You can't have free elections if the press is censored and you've been given incomplete information. The US 2020 elections was as rigged as it comes, from the information, the journalism, all the way through to the mail-in ballots and so on. But just notice government-funded science. I remember this, 1960s, oil reserves will be depleted in 10 years. 1970s, we'll have an ice age in 10 years. I remember them telling us, Kariba Dam is going to be, you'll be ice skating in Kariba Dam. Victoria Falls is going to be ice. Literally, ice age is coming even to Rhodesia. And we were literally being bombarded with this propaganda in the 1970s. 1980s, acid rain is going to destroy all crops in 10 years. There's going to be no crops, ice age, remember? And then 1990s, I remember this too. The ozone layer is going to be destroyed in 10 years. You're all going to get skin cancer, all the rest of it, ozone layer and so on. And it's caused because you've got aerosol cans. In the year 2000s, the ice caps will be gone in 10 years. Well, none of these catastrophes happened, but they all result in more taxes and more regulation. If you're not old enough to remember these environmental scams, you're not old enough to understand how the game is planned. You will believe climate change, carbon tax. Now, if you think climate change can be solved with carbon tax, give the government more money and that's going to solve the problems of the environment. Now, every time we cross the border at Bite Bridge in Zimbabwe, we pay carbon tax. Now, how does giving money to ZANU-PF in any way improve anything? These guys deforest forest. They use helicopter gunships and MiG jets to shoot up herds of elephant to harvest rhino horn in the game reserves. And these people, you think giving a government money is going to improve the environment? I mean, how gullible can a person be? And in South Africa, SANDF beating up people for your own safety. Don't you know COVID-19 can kill you? And this isn't so much of a cartoon, this actually happened. Police were kicking and beating people and destroying what they just bought from the shops because, COVID's dangerous, don't you understand? We're here to help you. Well, COVID was a little wave, but the poverty that came after economic murder was a lot worse. Notice the liquor store could be open, the abortion clinic could be open, the Grand West or Grand Theft gambling joint could be open, the casino could be open, but the church had to be closed. What happened to our freedom of association? But abortion, by the way, remember, was an essential service. Church was not. Because smoking is more essential in church. Our freedom of assembly was completely broken. How can they violate the Bill of Rights? Any law that violates the Bill of Rights is not a law. So when I said to them, when we were doing demonstrations, for example, we were not wanting to wear masks. We were protesting the masks. And they said, you can't march if you don't wear masks. I said, but we're protesting it. How can we protest masks? But then we remembered the law 1997, it is illegal to protest wearing any mask or any facial covering. That's a law. And then I was told by the policeman, they've changed that law. I said, how could they? Parliament hasn't sat since this lockdown began. And they just lie like that. But the law still is enforced. You cannot do a protest while wearing a mask. All masks are illegal for protest. And so our freedom to demonstrate was stopped. Our freedom of movement was hindered dramatically. And I mean, don't you just love all this nonsense? Avoid gatherings, reduce crowding, wash your hands. Well, you all have to queue up at the shop, by the way. And do you remember, this was South Africa back in the year 2000. And this is China. Don't you like how they show that they care about you as a member of the population? They have these special things that could sort of control you like you're cattle or something like that. And don't you like all the freedom of movement? Cancelled, cancelled, cancelled. And this is what customs look like. Nobody there. So you could cram as many people as you liked into a taxi, that's fine, but you couldn't walk your dog, you couldn't ride your bike, and you couldn't go for a run. Basically, this was euthanasia of the economy, suffocating and smothering the economy. And poor people who survived by selling some things by the side of the road, harassed, beaten, whipped by their governments. Not allowed to leave your overcrowded hostels. And this is normally seen. The amount of food that had to be thrown away because conferences, seminars, restaurants, all of this, suddenly good food, tons of food, fresh bread just had to be thrown away because of the COVID lockdown. And these are the people who used to complain about wastage. It's absolutely disgusting. All this good food thrown away because of this stupid lockdown. And you were sick until proven healthy. Do you remember this laser-looking like gun that they pointed at your head? Well, if masks work, why were lockdowns necessary? And if lockdowns were necessary, why were masks necessary? But no, you had to do both. And then I still see some geniuses, some Corans and Pans, putting on their mask inside a car, sitting alone. I mean, really, why do people walking alone outdoors need to wear a mask? I would be walking with my grandsons in Pans and have social, where's your mask? At home. That's my grandson. We live in the same home, for goodness sakes. No, all these Corans, you thought they were nice neighbors, screaming at you. Where's your mask? And do you remember Cape Town International Conference Center, prepared for all the crisis emergencies, never used? They brought in the biggest American hospital ship to New York, and I think they had a capacity of like 3,000 patients. They treated about 240, and then they had to send it away because it wasn't needed. It was fraud. Here's Premier Wendy in our Cape Town National Conference Center, all prepared for the overflow, never used. In fact, I'll give you another insight. My wife had to go into Vincent Ploddy Hospital, and the oncology ward was full. They said, we're putting in a COVID ward, but don't worry, there's no one there. And she was the only person in the designated COVID ward. And I mean, while we were being lied to about, the people are dying, there's overflowing hospital, they can't cope, and all this total damn lies. And then the idolatry. Do you remember when you were being locked up, you had to come out at night and applaud and cheer for I'm sorry they used the word frontline workers, meaning the nurses and so on work in hospitals for fighting COVID-19. The idolatry, the hysteria. Now, these medical people were heroes until the nurses were told they had to get the vaccine. They said, we're not. And then they got fired. So the only good thing I can say about the COVID cult lockdown lunacy was at least it did some cleaning and sterilizing of public places for a change. But it looks so fake. I mean, really, to get people this terrified that they are suffocating themselves in plastic bags. And then you come along and somebody force you to stand there while they point a gun-like laser instrument at your forehead. And, they could blind you, they could damage you. I can't believe people are just getting ready for this submission. You will submit. They could test your temperature on your wrist. They didn't need to go through your forehead. This is just like New World Order globalists, line people up. You will be a submissive drone. It's disgusting. And then they want to, this is so contagious, you've got to wear masks, but to test something, they've got to dig into your brain and harvest some brain cells or something like this. Insane. The amount of people who had damage caused in nostrils and all this. To prevent the possible spread of COVID, you couldn't even walk on trails in a forest. Couldn't even go to the beach. Now, why didn't they do this in aircraft? To give you a bit of space in aircraft. But no, they do this in the buses and they do this in the churches. We need to remember this because they will try again. And we've got to remember all this was funded by USAID. The virus, the vaccine, the whole deal. The lockdown regulations. Do you remember this? We had to go in. I went to a Bible college in Eastern Transvaal and arrived there. And the principal stepped out, raised hands like this. And a man in a hazmat suit with a big gas canister on the back came and he sprayed him from top to back and front like he was some kind of plant. And literally, so he came to me and I said, what's in that? And he said, detergent. I said, you're not going to stain my outfits. You can spray my hands. That's it. But I'm not going to get my clothes stained with this. I mean, are these people absolutely insane? Do you remember the propaganda we were given? Totally fake. People just falling over and dying on the streets in Wuhan. It was obviously rigged. It was crisis actors. So don't believe them when they give you this. Real pandemics do not require faulty virus models, rigged test results, inaccurate reporting, and manipulated death statistics. A friend of ours, her dad died of a heart attack, listed as COVID. Someone fell off a building, listed as COVID. Someone died in a motorbike accident, listed as COVID. And these are facts. They lied. But then the Gates Foundation were offering them more money to each hospital for every person diagnosed or who died of COVID and so on. And so they were incentivized and financially rewarded for over-reporting on every level. And then also for the vaccine. So the government sells fear that they can become your savior. Christ is fear not, because he is your savior. We need to choose Christ. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. But you remember the amount of people screaming and shouting at you because you didn't have your mask over your nose and mouth. I never wore the mask over my nose. I had it below. When they would say, you must cover your nose, I said, I've got a medical condition. I need to breathe oxygen. But, just the idiocy of these folks. Do you remember? They first give you the problem, then they give you the reaction, and then they give you the solution. COVID, you should be afraid. You're all going to die. Do you remember at the beginning? Millions of people in South Africa will die of COVID. The government told us millions will die of COVID. I don't know if one person died of COVID. I got COVID. I got every branch they had. October 2022, October 20, we got the first type. We didn't know what it was. My daughter came back from America and she said she had a flu from hell. I wondered why I was short of breath. It was quite unpleasant. It was probably the worst flu I've had. The next year I got the Omicron or Delta and so on. And next year I got the next one. So each year in January, I got whatever was going. We didn't lock down, we didn't shut down. We kept going with our work. And yes.
Well, I don't know any person dying of COVID. I know quite a few who were killed in hospital after COVID diagnosis by either being forced on the ventilator.
Yeah, well, that will do it.
Against the will of their families, by the way. I mean,
but they won't say died of ventilator or of suffocation. They'll put their died of COVID, wouldn't they? And even when a person died of the vaccine, my brother-in-law was forced to get the vaccine because for his work, he took 2 steps, fell over, went into coma, died within a week. They listed it as he died of COVID. It was the COVID injection that killed the guy.
Just too late.
But it's disgusting. They lied about, if they can lie about those things, why should you trust them about anything? But this is government. It was COVID 1984. Now, you know the book 1984. It was written 1948, but it was meant to be a warning. But I think our government started to use it as a manual or a handbook. The Ministry of Truth deals with lies. The Ministry of Plenty deals with starvation and rationing. The Ministry of Love deals with torture. The Ministry of Peace deals with war. The war is not meant to be won, it's just meant to be continuous. And, of course, the media would communicate a newspeak. Double think. And anyone questioning the official party line is guilty of a thought crime enforced by thought police. And that's what we saw in 2020 as well, thought police, fact checkers. No, you can't think that, you can't say that, no, that's wrong, you're going to be deplatformed and so on and so forth. Looks like you've had a little bit too much to think. Closed minds stop thought crimes. Support your local police. Those questioning the politically correct narrative could become unpersons, be vaporized, disappear down the memory hole. These are all terms from George Orwell's 1984. Well, today you get deplatformed. No one who sees this power has the intention of relinquishing it. And so it's very dangerous. The amount did you see all those people who relished this being social distancing enforced at the shops or sitting there to tell you put on your mask or pull your nose over your mouth and nose and, you know, all this sort of rubbish. And the people at the entrance to the hospitals, these were people who probably enjoyed being prefects or were deprived the opportunity to be prefects. And now they had the chance to shout at people and have a bit of authority and throw the weight around. You really saw the ugly side of society. Yeah. People throwing a family off the plane because their 1-year-old didn't want to wear a mask. Well, who can blame any 1-year-old? Anyway, it was just a time we need to remember. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said, governments love pandemics. They love pandemics for the same reason they love war. It gives them the ability to impose controls on the population that the population would never otherwise accept, creating institutions and mechanisms for orchestrating and imposing obedience. That's the whole purpose of these crises. And USAID, remember, funded this for the purposes of the globalists. And the hypocrisy, the double standards, the inconsistency of those advocating social distancing. It was insane. You could see in the bizarre leftist justification, the BLF, Antifa, EFF riots, that was okay. But the same people who condemned an anti-lockdown protest as a threat to spreading the virus, when we marched against the masquerade and the lockdowns, we were hit with water cannon. But the EFF, they could riot and burn and loot and so on, that's not a problem. Black Lives Matter came out in reaction during this lockdown. And burning. And this is a mostly peaceful protest, by the way. Burnt down the Minneapolis police station. And CNN, famously, with the police station burning behind, said it's a mostly peaceful protest. And yeah, mostly peaceful indeed. How many police vehicles burned? This cost a lot of money. This cost billions and billions of dollars of damage. But the police would not stop them, but they'd stop us from protesting masks or lockdowns. And all over the world, here in Greece, people encouraged to be violent. And many of these protesters actually financed, BLM was financed by USAID. All over the world, these thugs on the street to rent a crowd, rent a demo, burning, looting, setting police on fire with firebombs, really. And then you had these creeps who thought they could calm the situation by bowing to the mob or washing their feet or brushing or kissing their boots, literally. Policemen disgracing their uniforms, bowing to the mob, absolutely insane. Kneeling on top of a national flag. Absolutely incredible, but this does not calm a mob. This only makes the mob smell blood and fear, and then it just whips them for more. It's like a shark feeding frenzy when they smell blood. And even in Sweden, stupid, imbecilic, idiotic, in this case female, putting aside white sounds as violence and kneeling to the mob. Burning stores, burning flags, looting shoe stores. Nothing does more to help social justice than stealing shoes from a Nike store or raiding a liquor store or clothing store, as the case may be, or some fashion shop. But only 10 looters at a time in the store, and wear your masks and stay 6 feet apart. I mean, somehow or another, in the midst of this insanity, when we were cowering in our homes, mobs could be literally ransacking stores, looting, burning, and going berserk. And it was funded by USAID. This man who wanted to have a business was a dangerous lunatic, but this person who's looting was a righteous protester. So we learned you could be arrested for opening a business, but not for looting a business. We've got to remember this insanity, because this insanity was foisted on us by governments and globalists who will try to do something like it again. They closed 2 million churches, even over Easter. Anthony Fauci and his CDC and the WHO people, they managed to close more churches than Nero, Stalin, and Mao Zedong combined. I mean, just think about it. The greatest closing of churches in the history of the world. It was war. Become ungovernable. Yeah, BLM, Baal, Lucifer, and Moloch. By the way, if you said all lives matter, you were a racist. And if you said black babies' lives matter, you were a racist. Because 1 out of every 2 babies conceived in America are aborted. And so black babies' lives matter is a racist slogan, they said. All lives matter is racist. And they went berserk about that too. This was funded, coordinated, mobilized by USAID. This is all coming out now. So when restaurant and hospitality industry workers, friends of ours, peacefully protested in Cape Town, they were met with unprecedented violence by the police. The same police had stood by and done nothing while mobs had looted and burned and ransacked. So they used water cannon, knocking some of our friends and protesters through plate glass windows, the force of the water cannon. Water cannon is very powerful. And they tear gassed them, dispersing an orderly march for just to reopen our businesses. But they did nothing when people were looting entire container shipments of delivery vehicles. This is not far from here. And the same people who had been donating food to the people, Pick and Pay, from the same community in Dunoon, looted the truck and then burned the truck. And this sort of thing was probably funded by USAID because they fund these sort of mobs. We had more than half of all the railway carriages in Cape Town burned in 1 year. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was organized by USAID because they are funders for EFF as well. So Julius Malema of EFF said, it's fine to let the economy collapse through the lockdowns because it's a white economy anyway. Although many of the people on the ground were, of course, colored people, black people having their businesses closed. And this burning, looting, the police were very restrained with the looters, but they were not restrained when it came to people protesting masks or lockdowns. That they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. Notice, just to remind you, when you look at the box in which they sold these ear loop masks, this product is an ear loop mask. This product is not a respiratory and will not provide any protection against COVID-19, coronavirus, or other viruses or contaminants. Wearing an ear loop mask does not reduce the risk of contracting any disease or infection, and single use only. But forget the science, forget the facts, even though the virus is much smaller than a cloth mask, but never mind. And despite the fact that the World Health Organization, or I should call them the Wuhan Health Organization, said masks should only be worn by healthcare workers, caretakers, or people who are sick with symptoms like fever and coughs. It shouldn't be worn by the general public. The UK government even said the evidence suggests that wearing a face covering does not protect you. I mean, that's the official position, but you still had to do it. And this person posted, I'm selfish. You force others to inject themselves with a dangerous substance so you feel safe. You force others to cover their source of oxygen for months on end so you can feel safe. You force others to lose their jobs in retirement so you feel safe. You force others to stay at home so you feel safe. I haven't asked you to do one thing, but your list is long and endless. And it's true, they accused you of being selfish just because you wanted to breathe oxygen and go for a walk with your grandchildren or something. And these people are the most selfish people on earth. And I'm sorry for anyone whose name is Corin, but they were well naming them as, these Karens and, well, gee. And consider the importance of masks. Masks dehumanize. They don't put a mask around the person about to be shot because they're concerned about the feelings of the person about to kill. It's for the person in the firing squad. It makes it easy for the firing squad to shoot someone when they can't see his face and his eyes. The victim is dehumanized by having their face obscured. So firing squads are not there for the victim's benefit. They're there for the perpetrator's benefit. Now, it's long been recognized forcing Muslim women to wear a veil in the Middle East is dehumanizing. And I believe it's primarily because we've got understanding about domestic violence. When I first came to Cape Town, you seldom saw any Muslims wearing a veil. In fact, there was a bit of a headscarf and that's about it. This came in more in the late 80s and 90s. You suddenly saw the hijab coming on the face coverings. I think it's primarily to cover the black eyes and the broken noses and the bruises and so on. Basically, this is to cover up the damage done by some of these abusive men. So it really is a human rights issue, putting women behind a veil. And that's what they were doing with us, with the mosque. The mosques were not for our protection. They were a sign of our submission. They could see at a glance, you part of the COVID cult, you're one of us. And if you weren't, they could say, here's somebody who thinks to himself he's a rebellious person, he's a troublemaker, he's somebody we've got to deplatform and depersonalize. So they've discovered a long time about how it makes you feel like property when your face is covered. Now, non-mask wearers are not disease-spreading defiant imbeciles. In reality, they're fighting for the last remnants of your freedom you don't know that you're even about to lose. The amount of people who were wanting their masks, and even today you see some idiots still wearing masks. And I can only feel sorry for these people. I mean, why? Even when we were on our march, we saw some people in town, even some police people wearing masks. Why would they do that voluntarily? As long as you wear the physical mask, a secondary mask will form. The mask of fear, complicity, mindless obedience. The mask cannot be so easily removed from the human soul. And it was, in one sense, good during this COVID culture. You could see the people who thought for themselves and had a bit of backbone and resilience and resistance, and you could see all the compliant sheep. Just sad. A good slave code. Stay at home when told, queue when instructed, wear a face mask when ordered, go out only when you're permitted, socialize only when you're allowed, clap and kneel on command, desire to be tracked 24/7, spy and snitch on the non-slaves, give your vote every election, be subservient to authority, obey without questioning. This is basically keeping people on a leash. You remember the story of the Pied Piper? The Pied Piper with his music could get the children of Hammond, Pied Piper of Hammond, leave their homes and wander off into a cave where they disappeared. Well, it's like we were getting a siren song of the Pied Piper of WHO, CDC, the masquerade madness, the lockdown lunacy, the salvation by vaccination COVID cult. Some called it a plandemic. I don't know how many have seen the film Plandemic, but well worth it to emancipate our soul. Who would have ever believed that simply breathing open in public would be thought of as selfish and considered a social crime? I many a time told people I need to breathe oxygen, I've got a medical condition. And sometimes they would question it, but many times just, walked on. How to brainwash people as a cult? Isolation, conformity, indoctrination through repetition, fear and trauma. You're all going to die. Wear your mask. You must get vaccinated. It's just on and on. And do you remember this? Now, I remember being brought up in Rhodesia. We all sat in the back of an open bucky roaring over dirt roads in the bush. And now they're in bubble wrap and all that sort of thing in the back seat. It's just unbelievable. Poor kids. This is child abuse. Remain terrified, question nothing, stay at home. The media tells you who you should love, who you should hate, who you should fear, what to think. The media is the virus. So they asked some people in the Amish country up in Lancaster County, you know, the Amish, they have no autism, they don't have any Alzheimer's, a whole lot of things like that. Well, they don't get vaccinated, just for starters, and they eat natural food. So they asked the Amish, why don't you have any COVID patients? They said, we don't watch television. Which is so true. If you didn't watch television, you wouldn't even have known there was a pandemic out there. Now, during the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages, you knew about it because people were dropping dead everywhere. 1 out of every 3 people in Europe died of the Black Death, the bubonic plague, which came from lice on rodents from China, arrived in Venice, and the rodents spread over Europe. 1 in 3 people died. You knew about the bubonic plague. You didn't have to have a TV to know about bubonic plague. You didn't need a newspaper. You wouldn't have even known there was a COVID crisis if it hadn't been for the TV and the lies and propaganda pushed there and people forced to wear masks to make it look like there's a pandemic going on. And wearing a face mask increases your blood pressure, decrease your oxygen level, leading to hypoxia, increase the CO2, leading to all sorts of other respiratory problems, suppresses your immune system, increases your susceptibility for infection. The dumbest things they could have done is force people to obscure their breathing and then limit the amount of exercise you can take. That is how to destroy your health. If you ever feel stupid, just remember there are people depriving themselves of oxygen to protect themselves from a virus they're going to inject themselves with later. I mean, how stupid must you be to have taken in this whole COVID cult? For a country who killed an entire generation in the womb, but tells adults to wear masks to save lives, your words are a joke and you're an embarrassment. I mean, it's a fact. People who literally support abortion, and then they say, for saving lives, you've got to wear this mask. Like they care about saving lives. If masks actually worked, they would have been banned, just like hydroxychloroquine. That is true. You've got these people, normally funded by USAID, screaming for their rights. This is offensive. And then big business, big governments, big pharma step in, and they're very glad to restrict your rights. And that's what USAID has been doing a lot of. They funded a lot of the fact checkers, the Snopes, verify things, and they were funding so much of the media, so much of what you were getting. If they're funding even comics in Peru for the transgenders, and if they're funding even videos and plays for LGBTQ in Ireland, you can be sure they control the Argus, they control the Cape Times, they control what comes on SABC and so on. They censored Google, Facebook, the whole lot, YouTube. Facebook has admitted, Mark Zuckerberg has actually admitted, yes, we had censors. We set up algorithms. We were bullied by the FBI and the CIA. We took down 8 million posts in 2020. Now, for years, people are saying there's no such thing as shadow banning, there's no such thing as all of these censors, and yet now Mike Zuckerberg's admitted, yes, we did it. And USAID was behind and funding so much. This is the deep state of the deep state. This is the slush fund for political leftists. This is why political leftists all over the world don't lack for money, because these creeps were stealing billions of dollars from taxpayers to fund organizations diametrically opposed to everything they stand for. Can you imagine? No wonder Donald Trump is angry with these guys. They were funding the very prosecutors who were waging lawfare against them. They were funding the very newspapers that were spreading the whole character assassination campaign against them. And many others, of course, too. Like poor Giuliani. So these are the guys, Blinken and co. Their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues, they've practiced deceit. The poison of asps, snakes, is under their lips. where their mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their way. The way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Romans 3 spells it out. This is the legacy of social groups like USAID. And Bill Gates is now accusing Elon Musk of infringing on people's freedoms and rights. Well, Bill Gates is the guy who wants to reduce the world's population to 500 million and is the biggest sponsor of vaccines. Bill Gates said the best investment he ever made was vaccines. He said, where else can you get 1,000% return on your investment? 1,000% return on your investment. Vaccines are grossly overrated and grossly overpriced. Now, there's a lot of documentation to prove what we're talking about. To End All Wars documents how Woodrow Wilson began with the Committee of Public Information, one of the first censorship organizations in the world. Google studied the censorship tactics of Edward Bernays' Committee for Public Information, the propaganda which Woodrow Wilson funded in America. The American people were 80% isolationists. They didn't want to get involved in Europe's wars. But after the Committee of Public Information under Edward Bernays had been busy, 80% were for intervention in Europe and 20% were against. They got the American people to such an extent that they were lynching Amish people for refusing to volunteer for the army, to go to Europe's war, where they were stoning to death German shepherds, Alsatians, and Dachshunds because they were German. I mean, the hysteria that they could whip up just with a Committee for Public Information, that's back in 1916. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. Professor Anthony Sutton documented how the American capitalist, Wall Street, funded the Bolshevik Revolution. It's a staggering story. The best enemy money can buy. How the United States taxpayers funded the buildup of military strength of Red China and the Soviet Union. The best enemy money can buy. America was supplied the tanks, the trucks, the technology, the aircraft, jets, you name it. Everything provided to build up the enemies. Sometimes the Americans could be gullible enough to build up the Soviet Union because Red China's a real enemy. Then they would build up Red China's military because Russia's the real enemy. And they could go backwards and forwards like this every few years. And the people went with it because the media was so controlled. I met Michael Sturza. He was the former Romanian foreign minister. He wrote the book Betrayed by Rulers, how our rulers in many cases are traitors. Seeds of Treason, the true story of the Chambers Hiss tragedy. Alger Hiss was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's man that he put to lead and set up the United Nations. And Chambers was a Communist Party member of the United States who exposed Alger Hiss as a Soviet agent. Seeds of Treason. The United Nations was set up by a Soviet agent. Here's the first Secretary General. The betrayal of the Shah of Iran is another whole story, but these newspaper articles in Time magazine were normally planted by USAID people. And USAID played a key role in betraying the American ally, the Shah in Iran, and brought the Ayatollahs, jihadist crazies to power in Iran. And of course, kidnapped a whole lot of American diplomats and held them as hostages for 444 days. This is a real interesting one. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This John Perkins was somebody who was recruited to work in USAID in order to go and convince third world developing countries to take out colossal loans that the country could not afford, to get the country into such crippling debt that they would lose control of their own countries. And these big businesses, these multinational corporations would step in. Do you know that of the 100 largest economies on earth, 51 are corporations? I mean, many corporations are have bigger budgets than governments. And so of the 100 biggest economies on earth, 51 are multinational corporations. And so this Confessions of an Economic Hitman is of how he was recruited by USAID to go in and ruin countries' economies by persuading them to take out irresponsible loans. And there's more on it, like The Secret History of the American Empire, The Truth About Economic Hitmen, Jackals, and How to Change the World, how the United States has learned how to be an economic empire. Now, the American people are generally good people, but you've got some multinational corporations who are using the US Army and Navy like the British used the British Navy and Army to extend their empire. Now, the British had a physical empire where they raised the Union Jack, they took control of the country, annexed it and all the rest of it, changed the street names, whatever. But in doing that, sometimes they had to get the British to be their, mercenaries. So the first Opium War, the British could not trade with China. China was a closed country. So they started smuggling heroin and opium into China. The Rothschilds were doing this. And of course, the Chinese Navy tried to sink those ships and stop them. So the Royal Navy got suckered in, ordered by the British government to go and fight like mercenaries for the Rothschilds to enable their drug smugglers to keep smuggling drugs into China. This actually happened, 1840. And the Royal Navy had to do the dirty work for the Rothschilds so that the Chinese would become addicted to drugs, and then they could get them to sell their silk and spices and whatever else they wanted in exchange for the opium. Well, now it's reversed. The Chinese military intelligence is running the smuggling of drugs into America. So it's revenge. And it's deliberate. They understand the history. It's not accidental. But you also had the Rothschilds wanted control of the Transvaal diamond mines, gold mines. And so the British Army and the Canadian and Australians were mobilized to crush South Africa, that the British could get control over the precious metals here. So that's the way they used to do it. Now, America's got other ways of getting control over countries. They don't need to raise the American flag over the country. They just need to get the multinational corporations in. And you do this by getting people into debt. So they offer all kinds of benefits, and the USAID plays a key role in getting countries into unreasonable, unsustainable debt so that they fall into obligation. The hidden powers that corrupt the world. I mean, this is exactly what's going on in the world. And then, to give another background, Peter Wright wrote the book Spycatcher, where he exposes the fact that a lot of British military intelligence, MI6 and MI5, were actually Soviet KGB agents, including Sir Roger Hollis, who was M. You know, if you think of James Bond films, M who gives James Bond his instructions. Well, in fact, the real M from 1945 to 1968 was a KGB agent, a mole. It sort of changes a whole lot of those films' dynamics when you realize the truth. Not that any British spy films ever dared deal with the reality of what was going on. The fact that they were so riddled by the KGB and that they were actually undermining a lot of their best friends. In fact, the evidence has come out that even Harold Wilson, Britain's Prime Minister, when Rhodesia tried its independence, who betrayed Rhodesia, he was a KGB asset, codenamed Old Man. And he was an agent of influence for the KGB. Death by Government by Professor Rummel documents that the biggest killers in the world are governments, and that political science in most of the universities is fairy tale garbage. You know, governments exist to protect their citizens, provide for their people. You know, that's out of touch with reality. He said, the reality, this is Professor of Political Science, Hawaiian University, Professor Rummel. He documents in Death by Government. If political science is honest, it would say governments are more like a band of rapists and murderers in a forest who kidnap some poor innocent person and bludgeon him to death in submission. He said, this is more reality. Political science is not taking cognizance of the fact that governments are in many cases the problem, not the solution. And this deifying and idolizing of government is foolishness. Well, I wonder what he would think about this present dismantling government structures like what Elon Musk, Dodge, and Donald Trump are doing, which is more like the cure. Maybe we need to put more businessmen in charge of governments and get them to strip down and demolish departments that are no good. Black Book of Communism is the definitive textbook. You can drop it. It's a 900-pager. You can drop it on a liberal's foot and it'll make him limp. If you won't listen to the logic in it, it documents the actual crimes of the communists, written by ex-communists, from Stéphane Cortès, who is the editor of Communisme magazine in France. The Communist Party of France actually closed down after the book was published because they lost all confidence after the fall of the Berlin Wall and reading what the open files had revealed, that they were just criminal enterprises from beginning to end. Well, Mike Benz, the man on the far right, is an he's a director of Freedom Foundation for Freedom Online, a former State Department official, he's been hammering home the point. The federal government has been misusing American tax dollars for regime change, for viral experimentation, for money laundering, for private agencies. Why was USAID funding the Wuhan lab? And he's got a trail showing a lineage from USAID to Wuhan. The COVID pandemic was funded by USAID. A critical thinker would ask themselves, why would a government that is supposed to be focused on development and foreign charity be funding viral research in Wuhan, China? In an interview with Mike Benz, in a matter of minutes, he breaks down exactly what USAID has been doing for the last couple of decades. Under the cloak of being a humanitarian aid organization designed to advance American foreign policy, they've been assigned with the dirtiest tasks that the State Department can't get caught doing, and that used to be done directly by the CIA. But USAID is able to act as essentially a covert operations division in the way that the CIA used to, toppling governments, regime change, coups d'etats, wars, revolutions. Except it's not bound by the regiment of presidential funding to authorize a covert operation that the CIA needs. So USAID has developed into doing exactly what the KGB and the CIA used to do. When USAID overthrew the government of Bangladesh 4 months ago, the only groups that they could muster to form an opposition group against the sitting government were gay and transgender groups and 2 racial minority groups within Bangladesh, and youth and student groups who predominantly listen to rap music. So what did they do? International Republican Institution, in tandem with USAID, funded Bangladesh rap groups. They funded transgender dance festivals. They funded the local universities to push radicalization messages, to overthrow the democratically elected government. But that was Republicans. Remember, they've got rhinos. Republicans is named only deep state warhawk Republicans like Liz Cheney and so on. This was the International Republican Institute, not the Democrats. So he says USAID is not just abused by the Democrats, it's abused by the Republicans too. And now Donald Trump has turned his sights on USAID. He's got a new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who's pretty conservative. And now you've got some useful idiots out on the streets. Save USAID, save lives. USAID must be saved. USAID saves lives. Musk and Trump, keep your fascist hands off USAID. If they knew what USAID was doing, they should be clamoring for this institution to be not only closed down, but all of its senior members put on trial. The truth does not change just because you don't want to hear it. Putting your head in the sand is a liberal pastime. Even duct tape can't fix stupid, but it can muffle the sound. So there's a place for duct tape. And I think Donald Trump and Elon Musk are having fun. Elon Musk said that he needs to feed USAID through the wood chipper. That's a good description. We believe in smashing cultural Marxism. A quote from Professor Martin Luther: if I profess with the loudest voice and the clearest exposition every portion of the word of God except precisely that point which the world and the devil are at that moment attacking, then I'm not confessing Christ, however boldly I may be professing him. Where the battle rages, there the loyalty of the soldier is proved. And to be steady on all the battlefront besides is mere flight and disgrace if he flinches at that point. We need to make a stand. Psalm 94 verse 16 says, who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? And when I think of the people behind the Ukraine war, the toppling of stable governments in Egypt and Tunisia, Rhodesia, South Africa, Brazil, I mean, all the toppling of governments that they've done. We used to think of the Soviet Union being the evil empire. Well, now it seems the US government's the evil empire. Submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from us. Any questions? Like I say, an excellent background documentary is also Agenda 2. We must show that here one night. Questions, comments, observations?
So now instead of warfare, it's lawfare.
Lawfare.
And you know there is a saying that 92% of lawyers get the rest of that name.
I thought it was 98%. Yes.
Also, what the Royal Family, the British Royal Family were also involved in making money through drugs sales.
Sadly so. The opium drug trade into China was, they had their fingers in it. Very tragic. It's quite disgusting what was done. And China is now literally running the drug trade into America to weaken the very people who must defend themselves so that they would be able to conquer them later in a military battle. But it's not just drugs, but humanize a person. I mean, just think of the influence of pornography or rap and all the other kind of garbage. A lot of these video games, a lot of these sick slasher movies, the degenerate culture, the degenerate acid rock music and so on. A lot of this has got to be wrecking people as well. Frank, you had something to say?
Yes. Well, with Obama being Muslim in that, and we know that the Muslim faith is rather be involved in a man instead of a woman kind of thing. The woman is degenerate.
A what?
A what?
That's the term they use. A what? Meaning a woman is unclean. And so they look at a woman as being contaminating. If a man is preparing for prayer and a woman walks across his vision, he's got to go and prepare for prayer, clean and do the whole ablutions again.
That would maybe explain Michael and Michelle being Michael.
Uh-huh. Well, still, training perverts. What is it that you were saying about Candace Owens? She is waging war against the French President Macron.
Yeah, she's currently unpacking the President Macron story from pictures not being available from his childhood. It's actually alleged that the person that might be their son is actually Bridget Macron's son, or something like that. So they claim that they have a son together. It's actually Bridget Macron's son, and she had other relations before. So she's unpacking that. This is the second episode she released this week.
So this is the French president's wife is a tranny, transvestite. So when they had this perverse, sicko, blasphemous Paris Olympics opening ceremony, and President Macron came and said, bravo, well done, this is who we are, this is what France stands for. And, well, yes, it was. And now it seems they're a bunch of sicko perverts, well, at least the president is.
And like he started grooming the president from very young age, like he literally groomed him into presidency. And
So the president is under the control of his so-called wife.
yeah, since he was a teenager, like since he was 12.
Do you think that a country can have a national leader who's under the control of someone else? That's very disturbing. And Macron's the one who's talking about putting French soldiers in Ukraine, which could start a war with NATO. It's a world war. I mean, that's insane. So he's a real troublemaking character. But I was disgusted with his support for the blasphemy in the opening ceremony for the Olympics. So other points. I mean, anyone knows something else about USAID that I didn't put in that should be mentioned? This just come out in the last couple of days. This is such quick news. I started my research on this on Tuesday, and it's not often I put together a presentation so quickly, but it just has opened up so many. Yes, well, we thought there's something wrong about this, that, and the other, and now the evidence is out. So USAID is the skeleton key that opens up how they funded all these projects all over the world, right down to EFF and Roads Must Fall. Their reach goes far and wide, pushing the COVID cult, the whole deal, all in the name of aid and humanitarian concerns.
And apparently there's even control over the US Treasury that is told about how they are using money.
I'm sure. Well, the way they're going, I think Elon Musk could cut $1 trillion from the US budget. $1 trillion is a lot of money. John?
Trump also banned the United States foreign aid. And I think a lot of people may confuse USAID foreign aid.
It is different. Yes, so people think closing USAID is going to mean all American foreign aid is stopped. Not necessarily. You can aid people many different ways, including the health services can help with different medical projects. You don't need the organization USAID to aid people. Personally, scripturally, I think most charity should be done and aid should be done from churches and missions. It should be community to community, church to church, family to family, person to person, more personal, not going through any government. There was a time, not that long ago, in my lifetime, and I was born 1960, there was a time when most of the schools and hospitals in Africa were run by churches and missions, most. And it wasn't just governments coming and saying, we'll take that, thank you. In many cases, the churches and missions said, it's very expensive and that takes a lot of work to run schools and hospitals. Will you take it? And the government, sure, we'll take over schools and start to indoctrinate them with evolutionism, situation ethics, and atheism. And we'll take over your hospitals, your church are built up, and start doing abortions in them and so on, and transgender surgery, whatever. So sadly, in many cases, churches gave up the schools and the hospitals that we had established. I think all charity should be in the hands of churches and missions and out of the hands of governments. I'd prefer to see no governments involved in it. It's just a cover for corruption. We could bring all our taxes way down if the government would just get out of these things. And it's not going to the people who need it. And most of it's being stolen en route, as you know. So I think the American government can still aid people if they want to, but it's not healthy having all these people dependent on the US government. And what's happened is a corrupt class is built up. There's an excellent book called The Lords of Poverty. I should have added it to my list too. The Lords of Poverty documents the non-governmental organizations' corruptions. And WHO and UNICEF are top of the list. I mean, wow. Corrupt, corrupt, corrupt. And UNICEF, for example, produces school textbooks for free to Zambia, South Sudan, and so on. And these are situation ethics, evolutionism, billions of years ago, and all that junk, socialism, transgender things. And that's in the school textbooks. And Christian governments accept it because it's free. It's from the UN, and they don't understand. This is like new slavery. It's disgusting. I'd like to see the government get out of everything, except national defense, law and order, justice. Biblically, the government's job is to protect you from foreign enemies, invaders, and criminals. That's their job. Justice and law and order, defense, that's it. I mean, why do you need a minister of youth and culture? Why do you need a minister of sports? For goodness sakes. We've got, 70 cabinet ministers in South Africa? It's insane. It's just a trough for corruption.
I think we had about 68 million.
Yes, okay, now, I'm not a great fan of Jan Smuts, but when Jan Smuts was Prime Minister, we had 5 cabinet ministers. 5. And he had 5 cabinet positions as Prime Minister. He's also Minister of Defense, which I don't know that that's a good idea, but still. He's Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Parks and Wildlife, and I think he also was Minister of Water Affairs. And Prime Minister.
And they actually did their jobs.
Well, and it didn't cost a fortune because there weren't so many people, there weren't so many bureaucracies. So again, many of you have heard me say my teacher at school in Rhodesia was a member of parliament. And when I said, sir, how can you be a member of parliament and a school teacher? He said, we don't get paid for being a member of parliament. We need a real job too. Members of parliament didn't used to get paid. And, just to think the situation is, you didn't used to get paid for being the town councillor either. It's now become a get-rich-quick scheme, but it used to be citizens who had worked hard, who are now generally retired, who offered their time up for the community. And it didn't involve this colossal, massive amount of money that they've got to fleece from you. I remember when we bought our home in pounds, rates and taxes were something like 20 Rand a month. Now it's more than the rent or bond you were paying per month. It's criminal. People who have worked their whole life and paid their taxes now have to sell their home and move to a rental shack because they can't afford the rates and taxes. That's theft. That's why the Bible says it's wrong for government to tax property. Government should not tax property. It's none of their business. The government does not own the land. They are servants. Government is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. But anyway, we've just seen the most wonderful example of all the conspiracy theories being proven. I'm just waiting to see who killed President John F. Kennedy, because we know they've been lying about the single gunman, whether Lee Harvey Oswald was part of it or whether he's just a patsy set up to take the blame remains to be seen, but he certainly didn't act alone. And there was multiple gunmen, and there's been a big cover-up, and the fact that the CIA is still redacting these documents means they're covering up big lies. We've got, imagine a government that can kill its own president, that can use taxpayer money. While Donald Trump was president in his first term, he was being campaigned against by his own CIA and his own FBI and his own Justice Department were working to undermine him. And USAID was funding media that was attacking him and promoting his opponents. It's just, you can't make this stuff up. If you had produced a script for a movie like this, it would be, but that's impossible. And what's coming out right now is earth-shaking. I don't know how anyone is ever going to be able to trust the US government again after what's come out about USAID. They funded COVID. They funded the Ukraine war, for goodness sakes. I mean, just those two things alone. They're funding the BBC. How can you? I used to think the BBC was a reliable source of information. For many years, they've been talking about the Bolshevik Broadcasting Corporation, the biased Broadcasting Corporation, CNN, the Clinton News Network, Communist News Network, Sly Magazine, Useless News and World Report, the Cape Crimes, Sunday Crimes, and so on. So, we've got to learn to distrust our media. But we've been lied to on so many levels. And they knew they were lying to us. I mean, the evidence is coming out now. There was no science on masks. There was no science on social distancing. They just sucked out their thumb. Even Fauci's admit that. I want to see Fauci brought to trial. Even though Fauci's been given a pardon by Biden, I don't know if that's valid. I wonder if a presidential pardon can be outweighed by another presidential executive order. So the other thing is get Fauci in for investigations in Congress. And if he lies before Congress, then that's another crime. You can't be pardoned for something you're doing in the future. So they could get him on some new charges like perjury if he lies to Congress, which he already has multiple times, but will he do it again? He's got a pardon for past crimes at the moment, but they can still get him on something else. It's like with Al Capone, they couldn't get him on murder, racketeering, and so on, but they could get him on tax evasion. So, I mean, that's just a classic thing. The government's got a lot of options if they really want to go after someone. And they normally abuse it, but at last we've got someone who's waging war against the abuse of government.
And how do you think South Africa is going to be affected now with Donald Trump, this opposition to the ANC?
That is a good move to let them know somebody's watching, because they were just getting ready for some expropriation without compensation. And now they've got the US president who's on the warpath anyway, looking over their shoulder, pass up. I think that's a good warning. Maybe it'll put the brakes on something, because I think they were getting ready for something really bad. And my understanding is Red China's behind us. Red China was behind Zimbabwe, confiscating those farms. And under some of those farms that used to feed Zimbabwe, they found the diamond fields of meringue in southeastern Zimbabwe. And those diamonds all went to China. But still, they are convinced, the Chinese are convinced, that there's other precious minerals under the farms that feed South Africa. And so they want the farms for strip mining and seeing what they can find. And they will get, and of course, who's going to feed the people if the farms are closed? But that's not a problem. If a few million people die of starvation, that's small price to pay for China to get the raw materials they want. There we go. I'd like to see that exposed too. So we're seeing some major victories right now. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. getting into the Health and Human Services, where he can expose so much of what's been done. I really hope that we can see the real exposés of the lies they've given us about everything from the vaccines through to the COVID cult. We're going to have somebody who knows how much they lie, but he's also targeting the food industry that's literally feeding the people poison.
I wonder the connection between the USAID and Monsanto, all these huge organizations that are dedicated now decades to working out food and making something that's no longer God's creation, but things that make you sick.
They are linked because they've been promoting GMOs and all this other junk, which fortunately is being rejected in Europe. But I think we could see right now, it's going to have to be acknowledged pretty soon that there are no conspiracy theorists. The conspiracy theorists are just people who did the research and they uncovered the facts. Because who would have even thought of all the conspiracies I've mentioned today? You know, the way it was fed to us, you know, the war in Ukraine just happened because Putin's evil, you know, and yet when you start to hear about all the things around you realize, gee, this is a whole lot more complicated. I still don't know all the involvement of these creeps in the Congo, but they've been involved for a long time. From 1960, there's been superpower interventions and battleground, playground, propping one side another, corporations, multinationals, the amount of junk. Who knows what the full story is of the Congo, but I think these things are coming out now. So soon we're going to know a lot more than we do now, but just on the COVID cult, remember at that time, you know, you're endangering everyone's grandmother. How can you do this? And you're being so selfish. And so now we found out that they were lying all the time and they were getting funded to do this. And so how many other things is the government lying to us about? I hope our country will get a Department of Governmental Efficiency. Imagine how much billions of rands they could save if they just start chopping wasteful, unnecessary, corrupt activities away.